Well, speaking of going to live shows and seeing bands that we love, this is a big album for us that I think Nate you saw on tour for it back
Yes.
in 1999 2000, and Twan and I saw the 20th anniversary about a year ago here in Maine, both at the same venue, the State Theater. We're talking about Incubus Make Yourself.
Heck yeah.
We ready for this? We ready to do this, boys?
I'm ready.
All right,
Big,
cool.
big album, massive
Yeah.
album.
Yep.
Massive.
Why don't we do maybe a quick round table of like what you remember about this album,
Great idea.
Good call. Yeah.
like a minute or two?
So I guess for me, I remember the video for Pardon Me being probably my first remembrance of this was that video, kind of the old guy lighting on fire
Yep.
in the video, and then hearing it on the radio, obviously at our local station, and being like, "Oh, this is cool," and it incorporated a DJ and was a rock song, and I was like, "All right, I mean, this is something that I'm going to be into," and then friends liking it as well, and friends being like, "You didn't listen to Science? Check Science out," and going back and doing that. So this is a jumping off point for me. Was probably that video, and then ensuing how big they got, and they came our I think freshman or sophomore year, and then they came again our junior year. And I went to the show our junior year. Nate went to the one before, which I think he'll get to in a second. But yeah, that was my first remembrance of this.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, for me, same thing. High school, obviously. I think I knew a few songs off of Science. I don't even think I had the full album, but I knew a few songs. It must have been on. I think it was on like a mixed CD or something.
Family Values.
Actually, it was. I was trying to think. It was a live album, so it's the Family Values one. Yeah,
98. Yep.
Clean was on there or something.
New Skin.
And my brother's friend was a huge Incubus fan, and would always tell me about Science.
Is that Mike in Texas, his brother?
Nope, different person. He probably liked him too, though. That guy knew all the good stuff. But yeah, I checked out Make Yourself when it dropped, kind of because I had the heads up on at least the name and maybe one song. I really liked it and became pretty obsessed with the band. And that show you're talking about, Tone, was the show at the State Theater for the touring cycle for Make Yourself. It was actually an off Ozfest date with the band Shovel, and got rescheduled. It was supposed to happen in July and got postponed to like October or something.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Good on them for coming back, because Ozfest is usually summertime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's a great show. And ever since, I was huge into them. The lyrics are just so weird, but I always like that in music when things don't really make sense immediately. You're like, what is this music? But yeah, man, I love this album. I can't wait to do a deep dive. What about you, Twin?
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar thing. Like, Pardon Me was the first single, so you heard that. And I don't think at the time I understood that it was a big departure from Science, because I had heard New Skin, which the chorus it's almost Make Yourself-ish. But yeah, first heard them from that Family Values 98 tour. There was a DVD. I had the poster of it, so I knew them. But I'm trying to think. I don't think I had Science at the time of... I knew those songs. I knew New Skin and whatever's on that, but I didn't know that full album. And then you obviously go back. But that was it. And you didn't know what you were in store for the album just from Pardon Me, because like I said, it was kind of a natural progression, but all positive. It helped that we, like, all our friend group really dug them, and that was kind of my first exposure to this album.
Yeah, and it
awesome.
was, we all, I mean, it kind of permeated our friend group culture, and the culture in general at large, but definitely where we grew up and who we hung out with. A lot of people had this record, had it going in their car, in their CD player, or their Walkman in school, whatever. We were very into these guys at that time, and it's... You're right. For me too, this is kind of was my jumping off point with this band. I obviously went back and found old stuff and did the whole nerdery thing that we typically do when we like a band. But it was definitely a departure for them sound wise. They went from being on Ozfest and playing music that was a little heavier on Science and before that, and a little more funk here and there, to a little more not radio friendly, but kind of radio friendly pop. Not pop. I wouldn't call it pop, but it's a little more friendly to the alternative radio, and picked up new fans in the process and became this kind of big deal because of this album. Pardon Me wasn't necessarily the reason why. There were a couple songs after that definitely solidified that, but they did some cool stuff with Pardon Me that turned it into that and made it kind of led you down the path as to how that album was going to sound and why it became the phenomenon that it did.
Yeah, perfect. It really was a perfect jumping off point for the album. Because I don't think, are there any heavier songs than Pardon Me? Like when Pardon Me comes in for the chorus, it's massive. It's a massive chorus.
Yep.
The verses are, I mean, I'm not a time signature buff, but I feel like the verses are kind of maybe a weird time signature. It's kind of an interesting song, especially when he comes in.
Yep.
What does he come in with? A decade ago? I never thought it would be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's quick. It's almost rap, but it's not.
Right.
Yeah. He's flowing. And like you said, the off time signature, you can, if you just listen to Jose the drummer, you can kind of tell that nothing's really making sense in terms of how the song's supposed to be put together, which made it that much more unique. It's like, wait, the drums don't like go with the song, but okay.
I would say nothing really sounded like this on the radio at the time.
Yeah.
No.
There was a lot that spawned after that sounded like this. It sounded like them, but nothing. This was that. They were the sound of, like, Pardon Me sounded like Incubus, and nobody else was really doing that on alternative radio for us at that time.
In the moment, would you guys have pinned, like, did you guys pin them as new metal, as alternative? Like, because I know how I look at them now. Now in 2020, I look at them as almost like an alternative rock band. I don't associate them with the new metal crowd, even though they did the Ozfest shit and stuff. But
I don't either, and I don't think I did then. Especially, I mean, looking back on it now, we've spent more time talking about that genre and that time frame and new metal in general, but I don't think that I would lump them in there. They did kind of get their roots touring with those bands and being around that music and having some similar sounding stuff with that, but I wouldn't lump them in with that. They're alternative rock.
Yeah, I agree. I think the whole new metal thing is most likely because they came up in the same towns and the same time as, you know, what's considered classic new metal music. And in comparison to like a, you know, time in music previous, you know, we referenced the grunge era. So you got like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, but then you got the Chili Peppers, and they're not grunge. You know, so Incubus is kind of like that standout band that kind of came up at the same time with the same bands in the same cities or whatever, but didn't necessarily like reflect that same movement in the music scene. So that's cool on them. That's lucky on them that they kind of had their own little sliver of the scene. But yeah, Science going into Make Yourself especially, it was like this funk thing. And then, yeah, it's really hard to define what Make Yourself is. And it's kind of like it's almost like a concept.
Yeah, I mean, I listened back today through the album front to back, and it obviously has that, I don't know what you would call it, new metal adjacent sound. It has funk. It has some jazz. There's some tribal drumming in there. And then there's some parts that are instrumentally, it kind of reminds me of 311 in that era.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, they were boys, right?
Yeah.
They toured with them a bunch.
But that combination, I don't know, it's unique. It's one of a kind. It doesn't sound like it would work, but it does brilliantly.
Yeah.
So we wanted to do this a little differently than just kind of riffing on what we had for remembrances. We do have some cool remembrances and stories and things to talk about, but we also had questions for the band and questions that we would ask related to this time frame for them that we haven't really seen answered anywhere. And I thought this would be kind of fun to maybe bandy about a couple questions. Maybe I ask when you guys speculate as to why maybe that they did something that way. So do you want me to lead off? I got a good one.
Yeah, lead off.
Yeah.
So leading up to this album coming out, they were playing the Ozfest a couple summers in a row around a lot of those heavier bands. My wonder is, did touring with those bands and being around that every night in the summer change the way they wanted to do things? Was that the reason that they kind of softened, isn't necessarily the word I want, because there are some heavier elements on this album too, but went a little more radio friendly, a little different direction than some of those Ozfest bands did at that time? I'd want to know why they might have done that.
Great question. What's interesting is Science and Make Yourself were both on Epic Immortal, right?
Yep.
So same label. So it wasn't like a new label came in and said, hey, we want you to go down this angle. I mean, they might have done that. Epic Immortal might have, looked at the landscape or whatever. It could have been label influenced. It could have been them, hey, looking around Ozfest saying, hey, if we stay in this lane, this is the ceiling. I mean, if you're on Ozfest, that's your ceiling in that
Yeah.
realm. I almost go back to Label, where they said they saw Boyd as having this beautiful voice and maybe directed them that way. I don't know. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah. It could come from the label, could come from the producer, Scott Litt. And now looking in retrospect to these 3 albums back to back, Science, into Make Yourself, into Morning View, it is almost like this like progressive, yeah, like you said, tone. It's not necessarily radio friendly, but it is. So there's something going on there where it's kind of getting a little bit more polished out. Because Science is a straight up funk rock album, right? And Make Yourself is like I was trying to allude earlier, like almost like a concept album. It's not necessarily a concept album, but a lot of the lyrical content's very, actually listening to it today, it was like, oh, wow, a lot of this stuff is transferable to what's going on today. Mental piracy and stuff like that. So I think there's a little bit of both in there, maybe, where they were on Ozfest and just like, we know what we want, we know what our sound is. Brandon can sing, you can't necessarily scream, so you can scream to a little bit, but we're not really into that, that whole rough around the edge type thing. So we're going to go our way, which is they're from Calabasas, California, right? For at the end of the day, like they're in paradise.
Yeah.
So
Chill,
let's go
very
with
chill vibes.
Yeah, let's go with what we know rather than trying to force something. So,
in reading a couple interviews around last year's 20th anniversary, they just the album just had an anniversary October 26th, a couple days ago. So it's 21 now. But reading back, they had kind of mentioned being on Ozfest and saying like, this is intense. It's fun. We're having a blast. We're partying our faces off. We're young. We're kind of made it in our scene a little bit, but it's intense. I'm not sure we want to continue down this road. So I think there's a little bit of that too. They saw how that might be detrimental to them long term, maybe. The partying, the just downright adrenaline filled Ozfest type nights, I would imagine. That might not be the greatest thing for, a 25-year, 30-year career for a band. And they've been around a while now. So it obviously, I think, made the right decision, because Make Yourself is a great melding of what they were and what they were going to become, how they turned into something a little more friendly for everybody and not just Ozfest type crowds where it's going to be loud, it's going to be quick, it's going to be party central, that type of thing. So I think that's a big piece of it too.
Yeah, that kind of brings me into a question, like if Boyd was here in this on this episode.
And here he is, Brandon Boyd. No, just kidding.
April Fools. No, I'd ask him about the whole band aesthetic and his like personal branding at the time, because here you have Science, you got Boyd, he's got long dreadlocks. If you look at those old show footage, he's pretty eccentric and pretty wild, and it fits the music. And then when Make Yourself drops, you have this freshly shaved, clean cut, I mean, good looking dude. He's got his shirt off in half the time from that era. I mean, did you guys notice that?
Oh yeah, I mean, he had his shirt off when we saw him last fall.
Yeah, there you go. And he was this heartthrob. Like I remember in that era. Again, this is gonna show you the times. This was back when AOL Instant Messenger was massive, and every female had lyrics to Stellar or Drive in their away messenger.
Or I Miss You.
Or I Miss You, exactly. I Miss You. And like, I know my sister had posters. And would she have had a poster if Boyd had the dreadlocks and was a little less clean cut? I don't know. I mean, so I guess the question is, if he was here, if that was intentional, if that was like the label had an input, or if that was something he thought he had to do, or maybe it just happened.
It's a really good question. Really good observation too, because they do like fit. Like the Science is the funk, dreadlocks, baggy Jankos, right? All the old live footage is amazing. And then cut to 1999, 2000. It's like clean cut, simple. It's like a Gap commercial, white T-shirt or no shirt, jeans. Was that by design or not? Is something we'd like to find out or figure out. But it does kind of go hand in hand with the album. And I remember my brother's friend that I was alluding to earlier, when Make Yourself came out, he was livid. He's like, oh man, they sold out. This album blows. They're totally different now. If you saw them on the tours I saw them on, Nate, for Science, opening for Korn, and doing all sorts of crazy stuff on stage. And I mean, Science is just such a wacky album. I could see it, I guess. It's not a sell it move to us because we found them on Make Yourself, essentially. But yeah, I could see that even through his lens, let alone ours, trying to figure out what was the change. And we're fans no matter what. This guy was a fan for science and essentially, moved on after that. So
It's a good question, and I think the answer we're thinking it might be, and the answer it probably is, are I bet they're cousins.
Right.
There's probably a little bit of label influence. I bet one day Brandon just said, I'm sick of these dreads. I'm cutting them off. So he cuts them off. He walks into the studio to start, recording or whatever. And they're like, damn, he's a pretty good looking dude. Label guys are like, we should probably like capitalize on this. We're getting, roughly 50% of the population with the Ozfest crowd, getting a lot of dudes that like this music. Let's see if we can't get some AOL instant message or OA messages on some females with Brandon Boyd taking his shirt off. So I could totally see that being not pushed on them, but saying, hey, you're open to half of your fandom right now. Let's open it up to the other half a little bit with what we've got here. Play the cards you're dealt type thing. So yeah, so they write a couple songs and it turns into that, right?
Sounds like a Green Day American Idiot type proposal. Like, you guys can keep doing this, or if you do this, you'll sell out stadiums. It's up to you.
Right.
Here's the option.
There's a lot of bands that get that, right? It's like, go this way. And to their detriment, I would say sometimes those bands end up either staying in one lane because of that and not ever taking a chance and not ever putting out music that is going to work for them and maybe stifling some of their genius. But in this case, I think it really worked. Like, they did open themselves up to both sides, and it didn't really suffer it did for some, like you said, Nate. They sold out, but yeah, maybe they did. But at the same time, the music's still not bad. Like, that album's really fucking good, especially looking at it now through a 20-year lens. It's fucking amazing. And I listened to it today too, and it's still awesome. So yeah, I think they made the right choice, and why not lean into that and turn it into, you've got everybody who wants to go to the show. I mean, when we went last year, Twan, a lot of people our age, mid-30s, pretty mixed crowd.
Yeah,
I would say it was half dudes, half females, and everybody there was into it and loved what they were hearing. So it worked.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, but I've always heard about that there are certain bands where just the lead singer is signed. Like, I remember there was speculation of Paramore that it was just Haley signed. Like, she was the only one on the payroll, which often lends itself to solo careers, so they can monopolize that side of it. I don't think that was the case with Incubus, just because they started on Epic Immortal for science. But like, if there was ever a band where the label would look at, the singer as the golden child or whatever, it would be this band. Like, he's the full package. I'm surprised we didn't get a solo album. I guess maybe that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
we did get one a few years ago, didn't we?
Was it really? Maybe I missed that.
There was
it wasn't done in this time frame, so it wouldn't have had the same. But like, after Make Yourself, if Brandon Boyd had gone solo, it would have been huge, right?
Massive.
It may not have been good, but it would have been huge.
Yeah.
Like Drive-esque songs.
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Just pull him away, be like, hey, do a solo thing for a few years, like a Brandon Flowers from Killers type thing. Like, hey, ditch the guys, do this, capitalize on the moment.
He does have some literature and some art out, but I don't think he has a solo career. But that was 2010, it looks like. So
okay, yeah,
probably a little late as far as what would have worked in that moment.
Yeah.
So I guess another question that I would have, if they were any of the band members were here right now, they, for this album, brought in a new DJ, right? They had left DJ Life and brought in DJ Kilmore, and he's all over this album.
Oh yeah,
all over it. Yeah, like, you can hear, if you're listening to it and listening for it, you can hear his influence on a lot of different songs, whether it be subtle or in your face. And to have someone come in like that and then make such an impact on the album, to the point where they had a whole song at the end that was just scratching with a few other DJs. Pretty crazy for it to work the way it did that quickly, right? So I'd ask, how did this work for you guys? How did you guys meld so quickly?
It's a great question. And the DJs, right? The other ones you said, DJ Newmark.
Yeah, Newmark and Cut Chemist were both like in the studio at the same time, and he was like, "Hey, want to come over and do a little bit?" And they were like, "Yep," and they did. And that's just how you end up with Battlestar Strelactica or whatever.
Yeah.
Strelactica.
I bring it up just because I wonder if that was like in the hopper, and they're like, "Oh, this guy knows his shit, and he's connected to these amazing DJs already." Yeah. Regardless, it is interesting how he just kind of blended into Make Yourself and is prominent. It's not like he's just like little samples here and there. It's very much part of the layering, and then also maybe that's why it gets lumped in with new metal is because there's a DJ, and that's really it.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, because there's really no other elements of new metal per se. But yeah, that is interesting, man. Like it's all over his. Kilmore did a great job in the album, and I actually love that track. That instrumental track's awesome.
Oh, it's awesome.
It's a perfect place in the album too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any sooner it would have been like, all right, it seems like side A,
First
side
half and the
B type
second
of
half?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like the track on Hybrid Theory with Linkin Park with that
Cure
same
for the
thing.
itch.
Cure for the itch, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Han.
Yeah. It's just kind of in there, but it works for some reason. It kind of it's a good transition in the album. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. He came into the fold and literally just took over and does a great job right into their further, their albums that came out after and whatnot. But we used to call him DJ Lazy Eye, me and Bob.
Oh, wow. I got a couple fun facts about the song if you want to hear them.
The instrumental one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So Brandon had a dentist appointment, it sounds like, that day. And they had booked studio time, and studio time's expensive. So they were like, we got to do something. And they did this. And the only thing that he contributed was the name.
Oh, wow.
What?
Yep. That was his idea, which is a play off Battlestar Galactica, I think. So.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tuan? It's crazy that he was able to meld into this band so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, unless you knew, you wouldn't know that there was any change. But regardless of if you knew it was a change or not, like you'd have to be impressed. And I think for you to really appreciate it, go listen to this with headphones on and try to isolate on the DJs or the scratches or whatever. And I think you'll be impressed. And I think what would really make it known is if there was a way to delete that track and just listen to the album without the DJ, it would lose its essence.
Mm-hmm.
There's like an atmospheric element to this album that's due to, I think it's due to three things. It's due to the production, which is killer. It's due to the DJ, and I think it's due to the imagery of the CD cover. It just puts you in that visually, almost like this Battlestar. Like, what a great name! Like you're just in that mode, and it works.
Totally.
That's a really good call. The question I was thinking of is it looks like the album was released October 26, 1999, but the first single, Pardon Me, didn't come out until February 22nd, 2000. So I can only wonder, and going back to when we were reflecting on when we first heard the album, 99, like we're freshmen in high school, right?
Yep.
So we might have heard that like Family Values tour with that one song or whatever, but we didn't even hear a single because that was the only way we were finding new music for the most part was on the radio. Pardon Me, February 22nd, that's like the dead of winter. And then we kind of get turned on to this music. But what I'm getting at for the question is, was this a situation, hypothetically to the band, where they didn't really know what to do with it because you went from science to make yourself? They don't really know how to promote it. You have your core audience. This is kind of ousting them to an extent, at least my brother's friend. And you're kind of you're releasing the album, essentially third quarter of the year. It's a hard time to promote. But then you release a single in February. Was it like a restart? Was it almost going to be shelved? Were they going to be dropped? Was this like a weird, industry type, I don't know, mistake where they're like, shit, this album was supposed to come out earlier. Now we're behind schedule. Mm-hmm. I guess we'll start promoting it in the new year. I wonder what happened here.
Yeah, it's not even like Pardon Me was released as Pardon Me the way we know it now.
Right.
Yeah. It ended up being, they went to a radio station, asked them to come play, or somebody had the idea to have them go play at a radio station acoustically, Mike and Brandon, and just strip the song down, which, I mean, we all had on a burned CD at some point, right? I know I
Absolutely.
did.
Yep.
And that stripped down acoustic version from the radio station live.
I could play that, by the way. And I can't play guitar. I could play that.
Nice.
The little picking. Yeah.
At some point, we'll have you play that to open an episode just because.
Got to relearn it.
At one point, I could play The Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie, but ended up being Nirvana. But yeah, digression, tangent, guys. Sorry. But yeah, maybe whoever had the idea, and this kind of piggybacks off your question, and I would want to know whose idea was it, but they did that stripped down version, and then radio stations across the country were like, hey, come play at our station, because they like struck gold with that version. And it kind of blew that album up. It was not slow going per se, but this definitely, because that was the lead single, put this back on the map for them around 3-4 months after the album came out. So it's funny, like maybe they were on the verge of not being anything at that point, or like you've alienated your Science fan base, your Enjoy Incubus fan base, and you didn't really get anybody early on with this newish sound. Maybe that was a big crossroads. I would love to know if that was a big crossroads for them, because that's crazy. Like sitting in limbo around the holidays, like are we done? Did we fuck up that badly?
Yeah,
when the album is fucking gold, right? Yeah.
So, yeah, did this album flop? It just didn't get the promotion, or is it us as a band? Did we did we make a mistake? Is the label at fault here?
It's such a great question, and I'm looking at the track list now. Let's play this game. If they led lead single with The Warmth, that would have been a massive departure from Science. Their core audience would have said "fuck you."
Yeah, I think you're right.
If they led with "I Miss You,"
they definitely would have said "fuck you."
I think it would have done well commercially, but a whole different audience. Privilege would have been an okay segue.
Yep.
When it comes, I don't know.
Clean maybe.
Clean, yeah.
Clean's a hard single though because of the intro. It wouldn't work if it was a single.
It's too long. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
It's a great intro, but it's too long.
Yeah.
You know how I think you're onto something, Nate? You know why I think that?
What's
Look at where Pardon Me is in the track list. It's track 12.
Yeah.
Outside of like the new Deftones album where they put the lead single as the last track, you typically see the lead single at track 2 or 3, right?
Exactly. Yep. It's always 2 or 3. Almost always, seems like. Yeah, something happened. It looked. I'm assuming here. Maybe you can answer for us, Mike in the studio.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, my name's Mike, but don't tell anybody.
Head explodes. Wait, what? No.
Exactly. Let's fuck with some listeners right now.
Yeah, it's just, nerd notes, putting things together. Was the album behind schedule? Promotion wasn't lined up in time. It's all of a sudden the new year. Let's try to revamp this, or we give up. And sorry, guys, you guys are dropped from the label. Just imagine, right?
Right.
They became huge. So Make Yourself. Incubus goes on to like one of those punk indie labels.
This album, we're talking about this album last week on bands that we thought should have been bigger, because we end up loving this record when we find it.
Wow.
Yeah. Right? Like it would have been a completely different, they wouldn't have gotten their own segment. They got their own segment. It's a great hypothetical. Like if you didn't have anything really pop early, and then you went to this radio station, played something live, and turned it into how this album blew up. Stellar obviously was next, right? And that was huge and
massive.
Kind of brought in both sides of the aisle and got everybody kind of amped for them as a band and what they were turning into, what they were kind of their evolution. But it's a good question, Nate. I wonder if they were like sitting around the Christmas table or Hanukkah or whatever and saying, "Dude, are we done?"
Right.
Yeah.
So actually, the conversation we just had is a perfect segue into what I would love to get the band's perspective on, which is, so obviously they're waiting around Christmas time, Hanukkah time. They don't know probably what's going to happen. Album blows up. My question to the band is if they felt that the massive success of this album actually handicapped them in the grand scheme of things. And I guess I'll qualify that by saying short term after the album, no way. Like Morning View was massive. The tours were, I don't know if they were arenas, but they were, civic centers and things like that. But after that, like when you have a benchmark of Make Yourself and even Morning View, like Morning View, if it wasn't Incubus, it probably would have been even a bigger album because it's a great album. But you're comparing it to Make Yourself. And then A Crow After the Murder, I think, is where they lost me, to be honest with you, because you're comparing them to these brilliant albums, and it just, I don't know. I guess the question is like, if Make Yourself came out later in their career, how that would have shaped things. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you guys get what I'm asking?
When it came out, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Had this been something that came out like album 7, like recently, versus it wouldn't have been as big. It hit at the perfect time. Like it was. Yeah. They just couldn't have done today what they did then with the way that the landscape is. So it happened for them at the right time. I think are you kind of going down that road as far as
Well, so that would be a great that's a great question. But I think a band will never regret having a massive album. But I'm
right?
wondering if they like noticeably saw that like the crowd reaction to Crow songs was not the same.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like
okay,
from
yeah.
that from that lens of like if it
Yep.
handicapped them like where they were actually, you know what? Take the Eminem approach where like all his new stuff, it's just him reflecting on how big he was and how he'll never ever achieve that. So it's you're chasing yourself.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they were,
Totally.
and I mean those that 2 album run. I mean, I would call it a 4 album run. I actually like Crow. It took me a long time, but I did get there. But it was at first I was like, this isn't
Yeah.
this is another departure from Make Yourself, Morning View, and I like where they were in those spots. But at the same time, I like that they tried something different and changed it up a little bit, and it had a little bit more of an edge. But it was also weird, just kind of weird compared to those 2 albums. So
Yeah.
it just that one took me a while. I don't know about you, Nate or Twan, but that one took me. You Twan, you didn't like it that much, but it took me a while. Did you like that album, Nate? Crow?
Crow. Yeah, I like that album a lot actually. But it took me a little while too. But now I consider it one of my favorites. Well, it's still after, Science and Make Yourself actually, even maybe Morning View. But yeah, maybe this is what we're trying to crack here. The code here is the fact that it's just so drastic from Science to Make Yourself. Make Yourself to Morning View actually is in itself still pretty drastic because Morning View is pretty mellow. Make Yourself's pretty rockin'. Science is pretty funky. And then Crow is very like arty.
Yeah,
So,
agreed. Yep.
So they're kind of, to their credit, they're artists. They want to switch things up, but it might be too choppy. Like they don't necessarily flow. Like you could do Science Part 2 before Make Yourself and Make Yourself Part 2 before Morning View.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get back to, well, are you that band that just rewrites the same album and essentially uses B-sides off of, Make Yourself to make Yourself 2, that kind of thing. So to dance to figure this out, but there's no question in there. I'm just kind of dissecting it.
No, I think it's a great to look back on it now. That album came out in 2004, so a year, 2 year, 3 years after
Morning.
Yeah, and Morning View is huge. I mean,
Massive.
I don't know if it was as good as Make Yourself, but it's damn close. It's got some really good songs on it. It's got some funky digressions as well. The closing track is very long and is like you're on a raft floating down a river.
Is it aqueous transmission? Or?
Yeah. It's got some, they tried different things is where I'm going with this. And this is another one of those moments where maybe they thought, okay, we went from Science to Make Yourself and we did something different and it was really well received. Let's do it again. We had 2 albums that were similar, changed. 2 albums that were similar. Let's change again and see if we can't become different or pull in a different crowd type of deal. So maybe that's why, and that would be an answer for me as to why this went this way. Because I like this album. Again, it took me a while. And then what was the one after? Was it Light Grenades? Yeah. I like Light Grenades. A lot of Incubus fans don't like Light Grenades. I think it's really good. That's just a me feeling. But it's also not the same as this one. I think that won't be a little more Science light as far as some of that stuff sounds. So I don't know. It's a good question as to, they're playing Megalomaniac and people are like, I'm not sure if I'm into this. What happened to Stellar?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, the more I look at the sequence of the albums, I feel like the way it panned out is the natural progression. I mean, you couldn't go from Fungus Among Us to Morning View. I mean, it would have been like, all right, did they get a new singer? Like, what happened here? You know what I mean? It would have been that big of a departure. But yeah, I'm just curious about, again, no one's going to knock success. From a band's perspective, they're going to always appreciate their Holy Grail album. But I'm just curious if they noticed, hey, I think we outkicked our coverage with Make Yourself,
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing in terms of a question I would ask is, are these, were these drastic change in sound, direction, even art direction, really, everything, part of the reason that, the lineup changes are happening? You got DJ Life leaving after Science. You have Derek Lance out of the fold after Morning View. I don't know if there's a question there as much as it's just it's hard to follow these albums flowing into each other. So maybe that's where the band member shakeup happens at the same time. You know, Dirk Lance is very like funk bass. You're not hearing that really in Morning View or anything after.
Well, you're not
after.
getting
He's out.
really any funk from. I would say that Crow isn't really. It doesn't have a ton of funk, and same with Light Grenades. And so once Dirk leaves, you're right, similar. And then the kind of edgier stuff that you got early, you lose when DJ Life is gone. So maybe that's maybe the change in sound / aesthetic turns you into somebody's just not on board with that, and you gotta move on from them, and that's why you had some turnover in the band. That would be my answer to your question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's not forget the production too, because Scott Litt did Make Yourself in Morning View, so they didn't work with him before that, and they didn't work with him after, to my knowledge. Those albums together make sense.
Yeah,
and I'm wondering how much of a role he played.
Right.
So if he was here, I'd ask him that. How was it working with these guys?
He would tell you I did a ton, and they would tell you we had everything kind of together, and we brought him in to help mix, because that's what it sounds like in the Make Yourself stuff I read. They just brought him in to mix, but who knows? I mean, that for Make Yourself, I don't know if he was a little more involved in the Morning View stuff. He also may have been more involved in Make Yourself than they want to let on. So who knows?
Yeah,
that's good. That's good stuff. Any other tidbits we want to throw at this? You guys have any fun facts, or are we feeling like we kind of covered it?
No, I think we covered the questions and angles that I had thought about before going into this. But I guess kind of a closing thought for me is I always use the term in genre classic. Well, this is its own genre, and it's a classic. It's a front to back. It's you hear us say that. I think it's a front to back. I don't know that there's any skips.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it plays well front to back too. It's a nice experience, and the lyrical content, like I was talking about earlier, it's like very relative now with a lot of the songs. Maybe they're just timeless lyrics in itself. But I was listening today, like blasting it, and I was like, oh man, this album really works for what we're going through today in a lot of ways.
And it's an album that lends itself to being listened to again, and it doesn't. It's not something that you're like, oh, I've heard that enough. Like, no, I wanted to listen to it again. I listened to it today. I'll listen to it tomorrow probably, just because I'm kind of amped up on it right now. I put it on while my wife and I were making dinner, and I didn't have any. Sometimes I'll put a record on for her to maybe hear, and she's not as nerdy about music as we are, and I'll wait for I don't want to hear this. And I knew I wasn't going to get that with this. Yep. She grew up similar time frame as us, and it was huge, and she remembered it, and it was that door opening to the other side. So it was fine. It was like she was into it. She was singing along. I was like, this is fun. I should do this more often. Yeah, right. All right, cool. So thank you, Incubus.
That's awesome.
Actually, this might be a good future episode idea, which is the trifecta. And for me, the trifecta, which this album nails, is musically, check, lyrically, check, visually, check.
Totally.
It's all three, because the CD cover, I wouldn't even know how to describe it. It's like they did some weird thing with lights and the flash speed where you get that kind of trail of light type of thing.
Yep.
And it just works.
Like long exposure.
Long exposure,
deal,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it works.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, with some kind of like jellyfish image. Yeah, it's complex. It's weird. It reminds me of like the glass jar artwork, or like the Finch artwork, where there's just a lot of random details in there that you can kind of get lost in. It's another nerdy thing, right?
That's the type of stuff you get here. I mean, we love that shit. Obviously, we had Frank on a couple weeks ago who talked about how you come up with that stuff. So
yeah,
definitely something that we pay attention to here. The art that goes along with the music, because it's a total package for us. Like, that's the type of stuff that we love to dissect and talk about, and it's how we ended up doing this every week for the last 9 months.
Wow, I just noticed something. It's not long exposure. It's a type of animal. I think you're right, Nate.
Nice.
Wow. Gotta dissect that later. I don't know.
There's like
find out who made it.
Yeah, there's like wings and like some kind of jellyfish thing. I guess one last question in closing is, we like this album so much. We know there's tons of B-sides.
Oh, yeah.
Would you release a B-side album of Make Yourself? B-sides would probably be, because there's Crowded Elevator, which is an amazing song.
That's right. That's on the Japanese version, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It would be cool. Yeah. Hey guys, when are you gonna put more of that stuff out? Because there's some shelf stuff from this era that we would absolutely eat up as a. I mean, I'm kind of surprised with the 20-year anniversary we didn't get more of that. Maybe we will with the next one, Morning View.
That's a good question. Where's the 20th anniversary vinyl, dude?
Well, they were one of the when vinyl was starting to blow up. They were one of the first bands from this time frame. They're like, put it all out. Let's go. Maybe that was label, maybe whatever. They were out in front of it. But I remember, I actually think I have a couple of them in the other room, and they have Nate's name on them because he had ordered them. Oh, yeah. And he was like, I already have this one. I was like, cool, I'm going to go pick it up and pretend I'm you. And I think I still have Nate's name on it, which is fucking great. From 15 years or 10 years ago, whatever it was. So
that's so funny.
More random tangent nerdery from your boys at the Podioslave podcast here.
Yeah, because the wax, they have the limited number in the back, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah, I have the Science, Make Yourself, and Crow actually on wax.
Cool. So yeah, that was our kind of different take on a deep dive. We had some questions, we had some ideas that we would ask the band, and we'll tweet at them and see if maybe they want to answer them. Who knows? That'd be fucking cool.
Oh, it'd be amazing.